Hey there, art nerds. I have a watercolor tutorial that I'm really excited to share with you guys today. I'm going to show you guys my punch watercolor technique. So this is kind of a combination of a watercolor pouring technique and honestly punching out watercolor, as you guys will soon see, to get really interesting splatter background techniques. This one gets messy, but I'm really excited to be able to share it with you guys today, and I hope you guys will have fun with it. I'm going to demonstrate this technique with about 5 different illustrations, 3 flowers, and 2 larger, more like person kind of illustrations, just to show you guys that this is a fairly versatile technique that you can use with a variety of art forms to get a really fun, lively background effect going on. So if you guys are looking for more fun and short watercolor tutorials, make sure that you are subscribed and hit the bell notifications so you don't miss any of these from me. And if you want to be the first to get these watercolor tutorials, make sure you join me on Patreon. So grab your paint, grab your brushes, and let's get started. This technique works with a variety of watercolors, but one of the things you want to have handy is a vessel that is easy to pour from. So I have these spoon rests that I picked up from my Asian market. What's nice about this is it provides a large mixing surface. I can mix up a lot of water and paint, and the spoon rest itself serves, or rather the chopstick part of the rest, serves as a pouring handle. These also have a little bit of a divot where the spoon's handle would kind of rest against the spoon holder, and that works as a little pour spout. So before we start the technique, you want to have your washes or your mixes already ready, because this is a very quick and immediate technique. You don't necessarily want to spend a lot of time mixing up water. So after you've poured it just directly on your paper, you are literally going to punch at it to encourage it to splatter. You could also use something like a straw, or maybe even try bouncing a bouncing ball against it to get that splatter technique. There's probably a lot of different fun things you could do to encourage your watercolors to splatter. Now, for dry time control, I am going to soak up the excess water and paint using a paper towel. I'm just dabbing it into kind of the bowled over or the more standing up part of the water, if that makes sense. And then I'm going to move on to my next color. You can wait for the first layer to dry if you want more distinct layering, as you guys will see later on in the tutorial, or if you want wet into wet like I'm doing here, you can pour it while it's still wet. The thing is, you do want to pick up this surface water, this pooled water, because otherwise you're going to oversaturate the paper and it's just going to turn to mud rather than there being like a gentle wet into wet technique. Fun about this technique is you can introduce splatters into this. You can use this technique on top of existing watercolor washes. You can introduce a bokeh effect and lift up certain areas once we've kind of removed the excess water. It's a really good kind of basic technique to add to other techniques, to add a little bit of chaos, to add a little bit of liveliness, and to add some fun to your watercolor painting. I would recommend, if you're going to do this technique, do it earlier in the painting rather than later, unless you want to redissolve and melt some of your other colors. One of the things I love about this technique is, as you guys can see, it's very easy to paint on top of it. It doesn't have to take control of your whole painting. You can control how saturated you mix these colors and how saturated you mix the colors that you're going to paint on top of it. And you can also choose to cover it or let those colors shine through, much like with our tonal variegated watercolor washes tutorial that I shared with you guys earlier. For this one, I love how the purple just kind of shines through just a little bit, influencing some of the color on her dress and some of her skin color. Now that you guys have the basic technique, I'm going to demonstrate with some simple floral watercolors. This is from my Grabby watercolor examination if you guys want to see all 12 months painted. I'm going to start with a purple iris, and you guys can actually see what I mean when I say we're punching. We're literally punching the watercolor to get it to move around and to splatter. So to get that to really work, you do need enough water on the paper. You do need a thick enough mix that it will actually splatter and go somewhere. You may also want to pour your watercolor mixture from some distance to encourage splattering. And you guys can see how it works with a color that is part of the composition. This was a purple. We're going to do some blue and purple flowers now with kind of not as heavy a coverage for the splatting. So for this one, when pouring the color, I was also kind of pouring it in the direction of the flowers so that it would better complement the movement and the motion of the flowers rather than working against it. And I really encourage the splatter to go quite far. I love how that looks, and I think it worked really well for this one. You guys can see I had a reddish sort of purple, and then I painted using a bluish sort of purple on top of it. Next, I'm going to demonstrate how you can use a contrasting color for your splatter technique to really get some vibrant color. So I have a red-violet mixed up here, really encouraging it to splat and go all over the place. So if you're painting on like your kitchen table, you're definitely going to want to put something down on your work surface to protect the tabletop. And removing your excess water is really important, not just for dry times. It's also going to help you control saturation. So you do want to make sure your mixture has enough saturation that it's going to show up on the paper. But you need enough of this that it will actually move, like we talked about earlier. Now, for this watercolor calendar, I felt like this was more of a mixed media paper than a watercolor paper. So far, I've done this technique on a mixed media cotton rag paper and cotton rag watercolor paper. I find both work really well for this technique. I haven't had a chance yet to really try it out on a cellulose, but I will, and I'll let you guys know how it works. So for this, I'm using a couple of different colors. You can see them kind of mix in together. And then this is what the finished watercolor illustration looks like. So for the final demonstration, we're not actually going to punch it. We're just going to pour it so you guys can kind of see the difference. I am mixing up my colors in advance like we talked about. I'm going for some saturation here, and I'm going with primary colors, a yellow, a red, and a blue for this one, because this is kind of like a midsummer watercolor illustration. And I think I shared the time lapse over on my Patreon so my patrons could enjoy it. So just kind of pouring it from about 6 inches or more from the paper surface to encourage that splatter, picking up the excess water using a paper towel. I'm using Viva paper towels for this. They're my preference. They're what I like, but you can use what works for you. I don't have a sponsorship with Viva. I don't owe them anything. I just happen to like them. So water control with this technique is pretty important. I think if you're working with a more assertive textured paper like Shizen, it might not be as important to really get in there and soak up all the excess water so it's not standing on the paper surface. But for this is Arches, so it has some texture, but it's not a super assertive texture. So I do find that water control is pretty important. And you guys can see here how I'm lifting it up. I tear a piece off my paper towel so I have a jagged edge. I find that wicks the watercolor up a lot better than if I were to just dip a corner of my paper towel into it. But that works too, you know, different methods for different people. And I'm just soaking up that excess water. I'm not trying to lift up the whole watercolor splatter. I'm really just trying to do some water control with this. So with this example, I allowed all 3 of the colors to dry before adding another color. So here I'm adding the blue, and this way we're going to get some optical blending rather than wet into wet blending. Fun thing about this technique is you have a lot of options. You can really kind of play around with it, try some different things, and it's pretty hard to mess this one up. You might want to practice with it just a little bit, but I think part of the chaos, or I think the chaos is part of what makes it so fun. And it's messy, but it's not as messy as I kind of thought it would be. I work at a desk with my desktop computer underneath the desk, so I'm always aware of like trying not to spill too much water, and this isn't really a big deal with that. You could put a towel underneath your work surface if you were really concerned about it, but so I'm going in again with just like a little bit more yellow. Very easy to tweak this one. Another thing you can do is you can spritz it with a water bottle to encourage the colors to diffuse and to move more. You can do splatters on top of it to get some areas with more saturation. You can mix more saturated mixes and kind of pour that. It's really up to you. And I think it's a really fun technique, and I'm really excited to be able to share it with you guys today. And this is what the final illustration looks like. So we do still see some of that pour technique. Some of the colors are influencing the colors that we painted on top of it, but I think it's just such a breath of fresh air. It's really fun. It's really vibrant. For someone like me whose work can get stagnant and boring very quickly, I think this is a really fun technique to be able to play around with, to add some liveliness to it. And I hope you guys will find it useful, and I hope you guys found this tutorial to be useful in explaining this technique, because I know I've hinted at it quite a few times in some of my more recent videos. So here you guys, now you know the secret to it, right? So that was a demonstration of the watercolor punch technique. It is a really easy, fun, vibrant technique. It's definitely a less is more sort of thing. Maybe not like 10 layers of this, maybe up to 4 colors. This is a really fun one with granulating colors. This is a really fun one with separating colors. And this is a really fun one with assertive colors that you can paint on top of it. So if you are looking for more watercolor inspiration, if you're looking for some more quick and easy watercolor tutorials, I have several for you guys. I will link them in the cards and in the description below. As I mentioned earlier, if you are new here, or even if you're old here, if you like what I do, make sure you are subscribed and click the bell notification, and let me know down in the comments which of these 5 demonstrations was your favorite, and did you leave this tutorial feeling inspired? Because that is definitely my goal for you. I want to make watercolor accessible and enjoyable for more people, because I want everyone to be able to fall in love with watercolor. It's one of my favorite mediums. If you've got time today, it would also mean the world to me if you checked out my watercolor webcomic, 7-Inch Kara. You can read it for free at 7inchkara.com, or share it with someone in your life who enjoys whimsical stories and comics. I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Huge thanks to my amazing patrons on Patreon. They got this video first, and they make tutorials like this possible. Thank you guys so much.